Many years ago, a powerful wizard imprisoned a dragon that was terrorizing the forests. Now that dragon has revived, and you must use the power of the wizard's descendants, the Drazzle family, to stop the dragon once again. This requires recovering 4 crowns to procure the Dragon Slayer, a magical sword that is the only weapon powerful enough to do the job. You guide members of the Drazzle family one at a time through a vast underground cavern comprised of hundreds of rooms. You can use gold to purchase items, and certain defeated monsters leave items behind. Said items include shields, wings, health elixirs, keys, crosses, gloves, power boots, jump shoes, fire rods, and more. Each family member has different strengths and weaknesses, and each must be used to complete the quest, making for a complex adventure. Surviving the dungeons requires quick reflexes and quick wits, and strategic thinking is extremely important in this game as you seek the hidden crowns.
If the first 2 games in this top-down maze puzzler series were a bit frustrating for you, you'll appreciate the new Grandpa's Learning Tree feature, where an old man shows you how to solve specific puzzles. The game also introduces underwater levels, a rainbow egg and key, and a main map that lets you finish levels in the order that you choose. Certain locations remain blocked until you find a key after completing a different level. Plus, you can play as either Lolo or his girlfriend Lala, switching between them as desired. They play the same, but I like the girl power sentiment, as Lala was merely a kidnapping victim in the other 2 games. There are also new enemies. Otherwise, Adventures of Lolo 3 offers much of the same type of action. Collect heart containers, move blocks, and use egg shots to turn enemies into eggs that can block other creatures, make a raft, and more. Passwords are available again, but now you've also got infinite lives. If you enjoy such maze titles as Miss Pac-Man and Trog, but want more puzzle elements, give the Adventures of Lolo series a try. My parents got divorced when I was 13, and it was quite a shock, because it was totally unexpected. In hindsight, though, I probably should have seen the signs, as my mom went to live with someone else, and my dad, whom we stayed with, began officially dating a new woman almost straight after. This new woman lived far from us, and she had a big house and several kids of her own. So when Dad would go to see her on the weekend, we would stay over too. And this was great, as not only did they have lots of games we didn't have, but we would go to the local social club that had a Play Choice 10 machine along with a pool table and lots of other fun things in the back room. One game that we instantly knew and loved was Kung Fu, which of course was a port of the excellent Irem Coin-Op Kung Fu Master. Another reason why this title got so much play compared to the others was that I had previously purchased the ZX Spectrum port of the game, which was absolutely terrible, and the awful taste quickly left my mouth playing the near-perfect NES iteration. Between this game and Excite Bike, the spare change my dad would give me went pretty quickly. Drop your memories in the comments, and thanks for watching.
You begin the game when you see a bird killed by an arrow outside of your ninja school who was carrying a note about your girlfriend being kidnapped. It feels like we're missing a buttload of context, but hey, this is the reality of the story of games from the mid-80s. You control Nikki as he fights through waves of enemies, eventually culminating in a boss fight at the end of each of the game's 7 stages. The game throws waves of enemies at you, from basic blue to advanced red ninjas, birds, and other creatures. Most of them are there just so there's something for you to swing your sword at, but others take some skill and practice to defeat or avoid. There are a few power-ups that help you in your quest, like the ability to shoot fireballs, but they last for a short amount of time before going away. At the end of each stage, you face a boss that presents a greater challenge. An interesting gameplay element in the boss fights is that striking the enemy causes you to lose your sword, forcing you to retrieve it after every blow. Kid Nikki is a short experience and can be completed in about 20 minutes by skilled gamers.
Kid Nikki drops at 97 on our list. Share your memories in the comments.
Turtle Mania was sweeping the world when this came out in 1989. That's probably why this game was so popular despite it being an unfair bag of dogs droppings. So popular was the franchise that Nintendo even bundled the NES with this game in Europe, replacing the mighty Super Mario Bros. Kart. It's easy to see why so many persevered with this at the time. It had the turtles in it. Unfortunately, not many of the bad guys from the TV show even appear in the game. A bit of an oversight, you might say. Instead, baddies are just generic looking and could be from any other action platform game instead. They did put in Bebop and Rocksteady, but that was about it. Basically, the game is a platform game, but there are overhead driving sections as well. Both are probably as irritating and unfair as each other. The 4 turtles you can play as are hopelessly unbalanced. Raphael and Michelangelo have terrible reach with their weapons, so it is much too easy to get hit. Coupled with the lousy collision detection, you will be tearing your hair out before long. Things are better with Donatello and the reach of his staff, so try to keep him alive.
A classic puzzler that will make you scratch your head until your hair falls out. Nothing feels more rewarding than mastering each challenge, and it looks fantastic. Lolo and all his enemies are animated wonderfully and illustrated in a way that Lolo moves his entire body when he walks and pulls silly faces when he gets hurt. The enemies always seem alive as they turn their heads and watch you walk by. The rooms appear detailed, although each one basically looks the same. Sure, you'll be presented with different layouts, objects, and enemies, but the brick walls and floors never change. The music consists of one song that plays throughout, and although it's catchy, it becomes repetitive rather quickly. Sound effects as you use abilities, collect items, and clear rooms are satisfying, but you'll probably prefer to play on mute after a while. There are only 50 rooms to master, and once you're done, that's all there is to do. This may take quite a while depending on your critical thinking skills, but it's still rather short. Adventures of Lolo falls at 95 on our list. Share your memories in the comments. Thanks for watching. While Mario and Luigi are hard at work doing some underground plumbing, shell creepers, sidesteppers, and fighter flies begin coming out of the pipes. The brothers must knock these sewer pests into oblivion before the timer runs out. You control Mario, and a second player can join as Luigi. After you defeat all the creatures, you move on to the next level. The playfield is composed of 7 platforms and a brick floor. To stun a creature, you must get directly underneath it, jump, and effectively punching the platform it walks on. While the creatures lie motionless, you hop up to where it is and knock it off the screen before it has time to recover. If it does get back on its feet, it will become faster and therefore harder to stun. You can stun or revive all the on-screen creatures simultaneous by hopping under a POW button that appears near the lower portion of the screen. This is a nice port of Nintendo's 1983 arcade classic, which features the debut of Luigi and established Mario as a plumber. Mario Bros. Drops at number 94 on our list. Drop your memories in the comments. Thanks for watching. I didn't own Spy Hunter when I was a kid, but several of my friends did, and I played it frequently at my buddy Jared's house. We were too young, 9 or 10, to recognize the game's illustrious history and theme music. The arcade version was by then long past its peak, and for all I knew, Peter Gunn was what you would call Peter Pan if he snuck a Colt 45 into a fight with Captain Hook. But we loved the game's on-your-toes mix of fast driving and taking out or avoiding enemy vehicles, and locating the boathouse was always the coolest part of the action. I never managed to win the game as there's no actual end. Spy Hunter continues indefinitely until you've crashed your last car into a game over, but that wasn't widely known until the internet era. And I sure remember plenty of kids back then claiming to have beaten it, elementary school braggadocio at its finest. The endless course layout does lend to a superb replay value, as there's always the continuous opportunity to better your score. Resultingly, Spy Hunter holds up especially well among NES games decades later, and having finally purchased it as an adult, I still enjoy playing it to this day. Nearly 30 years before the Supreme Court ruled that video games are an art form, 12-year-old me discovered the coin-op classic Marble Madness. It was beautiful. The blue and red glowing trackballs, the soft 3D graphics, the creative gameplay. But what stood out the most was the melodic, catchy, and often nightmarish music pouring out of the machine. Marble Madness was one of the first games offering true stereo sound, which contributed greatly to its success. It had a recognizable theme and was indeed a work of art. Years later, I spotted the NES version of Marble Madness. I wondered if it included the arcade music, and if it did, how well did it translate? It delivered. It was comforting to hear the memorable melodies again, so much so that it inspired me to record a gaming mixtape. In 1984, Marble Madness ambitiously opened the floodgates for video game music to excel. When I think of the soundtrack to my childhood, it's not all Run DMC, They Might Be Giants, and Bruce Springsteen. The NES sound chip will always be a significant part, thanks in large way to Marble Madness. Set 100 years after the first game in the series, Dragon Warrior 2 finds Moonbrook Castle under attack by the evil Hargon the Sorcerer, who aims to rule the world by calling on the ill-omened gods from the dark. To save the day, players must journey through a world 4 times as large as found in the original Dragon Warrior. Gameplay is similar to Dragon Warrior, but with several new features including more spells and items, sailboat navigation, battles against groups of monsters, and 3 playable characters, the Prince of Mendenhall, the Princess of Moonbrook, and the Prince of Cannock. You'll have to manage your resources well, play smartly, and know when to charge ahead and when to turn back. The field graphics are somewhat basic, but the character and monster design is undeniably charming, with a lot of series regulars making their debut. The music fares nicely too, with more songs than the original game. Major props for setting the JRPG standard of multiple party members and multiple enemy groups. A game that appears to be inspired by Sega's Outrun, this early title from Square should appeal to most fans of arcade-style racing games. After selecting one of two cars, a 328 twin-turbo or an F1 machine, you begin racing on the first of 8 different twisting, turning time courses, including a run through the Rocky Mountains, a stretch in Athens, Greece, and a spectacular-looking night drive through the San Francisco skyline. Bumping into other cars is allowable but dangerous, since getting bumped into roadside trees and signs is a common occurrence, especially during turns. The view is from behind your car, which moves at an immensely satisfying turbo-enhanced max speed of 255 km per hour. Strategies include paying attention to roadside curb signs, going in and out of the curves, and using the slipstream. Rad Racer was originally packaged with a cheaply produced pair of 3D glasses, but I've seen the vast majority of gamers play Rad Racer in 2D mode. That's certainly the case for me. For an NES title, Pirates is a surprisingly deep mix of text-based strategy, sea battles, and sword fights. The sword fights aren't much to look at, thanks to swords that look more like batons. Otherwise, Pirates' graphics are bright and inviting, with scenic towns and dark taverns rendered in meticulous detail. I also love the shimmering bright blue sea and the swashbuckling musical score. Patient gamers will relish the layers of strategy, which include opportunities to spread your influence, betray treaties, marry a wench, and discover lost treasure. Less patient gamers like myself, however, are likely to lose interest over time due to the sluggish sea battles and the repetitive nature of it all. I'll admit that Pirates is not the type of game that I get into, but giving it credit, the game does take some unique play mechanics and roll them together into a cohesive game. The control scheme can be pretty clunky. Ships generally feel heavy to turn, and although this is presumably intentional with the larger vessels, it can still be frustrating. I remember the first time I laid eyes on the NES version of Super Dodgeball. It was at my friend's house, and he was having my brother and I over for a sleepover party. We were sifting through a pile of NES games, and the artwork for the game grabbed my attention. We decided to play it, and I noticed that the dodgeball players featured in the game were like characters from another NES favorite of mine, River City Ransom. Like River City Ransom, everything about Super Dodgeball screams charm. The characters are uber cute, and each has hilarious reactions that give them larger-than-life personalities. For example, after a tired player takes a hit that knocks him to the ground, he'll get back up and pant for a few seconds before returning to action. Another example is how certain opponents will laugh while holding their bellies after they win a match. The music throughout each stage is also memorable, especially England's stage, which is a mashup of the Beatles' Hard Day's Night and Get Back. Super Dodgeball has stuck with me through the years, and I still plug it into my NES from time to time when I'm having a hard time deciding what to play. Developed by David Pitfall Crane, A Boy and His Blob shares some things in common with Pitfall, but it also features a highly original component, that of an alien blob following players as they run around collecting treasures, climbing stairs, shooting vitamins at enemies, and dodging falling rocks, stalactites, chocolate kisses, and other obstacles. The blob is the key to success, since feeding him jelly beans turns him into various shapes, such as a ladder, a bridge, a rocket, a hole, or a blowtorch. There are 14 different jelly bean flavors, each with a different effect on the blob. The action can get tedious, but it's nice that the game requires players to think their way through each area. There's a lot to like about A Boy and His Blob, with some cool digitized graphics and animations bringing the story to life. The transforming blob introduces some interesting opportunities, but the lack of scrolling screens and other rough edges do detract from the overall appeal. It's a silly concept and looks like Crane's 2600 titles, but it still plays very well. During the late 80s and early 90s, kids thought boomerangs were the coolest. Or maybe it was just me and my friends. Either way, while browsing through my local rental store, I happened upon this fantastic little game called Power Blade. I picked it up assuming, as one would, that the game would feature some sort of super cool sword. But this hero did not carry a sword, he wielded a boomerang. One that could be thrown in any direction. I got serious Mega Man vibes playing the game over the weekend, and I knew I had to own it. It was an absolute blast to play through over and over again because it was just so damn fun. Flinging that boomerang around and gaining power-ups to make it and you more powerful never get old. It still holds up and should have a place in every NES collection. Power Blade himself is easy to control and the collision detection is perfect. The wealth of power-ups adds a lot to the action, as does the maze-like structure of the complex, meaning you have to find a route through instead of just walking left to right. When people talk about NES games being difficult, this one doesn't come up nearly as often as it should. I rented it once based on its awesome cover art, and I kept renting it because it's incredibly fun to play. At a certain point, I felt confident that I was decently good at it. I could regularly get pretty far, but what I assumed was the last bit of the game was absurdly difficult. I decided to do a little recon to find out how much further I had to go to beat the game. I plugged in my Game Genie, put in some cheat codes, and got past the part where I was stuck, and this game kept going, and going, and going. Turns out that crazy hard bit was only about halfway through the game, and things got progressively more insane from there. To this day, I don't know a single person who even claims to have beaten Cobra Triangle without the use of cheat codes. You think Ninja Gaiden is hard? Cobra Triangle and its helicopter-powered boat would like to say hello. Rare has created some of the greatest games of all time, so it should be no surprise that Cobra Triangle exhibits the solid craftsmanship that has become the hallmark of Rare games. Back in the early 90s, my mom loved buying things on the Home Shopping Network. One day a nondescript box arrived. There was nothing unusual about that, and I paid no mind until my mom called me into the kitchen and pulled out an NES game called Guerrilla War. I'd never heard of it before then, although I was familiar with some of SNK's other NES games. She chose wisely, though, as it ended up becoming my favorite overhead run and gun on the NES. I eventually discovered that Guerrilla War was called Guevara in Japan and was based on the Cuban Revolution that Che Guevara and Fidel Castro led against the Batista dictatorship in the 50s. The majority of references were removed, and I know they were lost on me, although I do remember thinking that the island shown on the map looked a lot like Cuba. Many years have passed since that. Unfortunately, I no longer have my original copy. I wish I did, as my mother passed away a couple years after surprising me with the game, but the memory remains. Thanks, Ma. Guerrilla War lands at 84 on our list. Share your memories in the comments. Thanks for watching. The evil wizard Malkil has returned to the land of Cinderin, and he's more powerful than ever, unleashing his fury in the form of 4 elementals: earth, wind, water, and fire. As the muscle-bound Kyros, you must reconstruct the Iron Sword, the only weapon Malkil fears. The sequel to Wizards and Warriors has you exploring dark caverns and hazardous terrains, discovering hidden treasures and magic spells as you go. The game adds a few new elements to the enemy stabbing platform jumping action, including gambling minigames and shops where you can purchase keys, food, armor, and magic spells, the last of which enable you to gain speed, become invisible, turn enemies into food or coins, and more. Spells are especially useful against the aforementioned elementals, which are also new to the series. The box for the game sports a painting of a muscle-bound model Fabio, making the game a potential collector item for romance novel enthusiasts. Absolutely fantastic graphics and heaps of action make Iron Sword a must-have. It was 1989, and the noisy Brazilian family that rented the house adjoined to ours had moved out, and the actual owners of the property were back. We'd never met them, so I was excited to discover they had a pair of sons that were roughly the same age as me and my younger brother. We were even happier to discover that both Martin and John had NES and were really into video games. The console wasn't very successful in the UK, and the only place we had ever seen one was in a pharmacy chain called Boots. Martin explained they had owned one in America where everybody had one, and was surprised to find out the machine was less popular back home. He just had 2 games, Super Mario Bros. And Ice Climber. Soon after, my brother and I became addicted to Ice Climber. It was a 2-player co-op which reminded us of Bubble Bobble in that regard. It had a simple concept, but the difficulty curve was just right to keep you playing. Although it was co-op, the game had a fun element of competition. Who can get the furthest? Martin and I remained friends until adulthood, and when I heard from him years later, one of the first things he asked me was, "Do you remember playing Ice Climber?" Wizards and Warriors was one of my favorite childhood NES games. Ironically though, I almost never bought it to begin with because some friends of mine declared the awesome-looking box art to be completely deceptive, with the real gameplay looking nothing like it and actually being kinda lame. Granted, kids can exaggerate, but at that age it was tough to go against the grain. I certainly didn't want to seem uncool, and with enough money saved for one game, I also couldn't afford to make a costly mistake. But the fantasy setting of Wizards and Warriors nevertheless intrigued me, so I decided to take the plunge. The result? My friends were certainly right about the gameplay not resembling box art. The protagonists and enemies do indeed look different, but far from being lame, the gameplay is immensely enjoyable. Wizards and Warriors packs action, adventure, puzzle solving, exploration, and point scoring all into a fun and challenging quest that requires patience and practice, but ultimately is very winnable and rewarding. That said, the game does take some time to grasp, and I can see in hindsight how the initial learning curve might seem off-putting to some. Stick it out a little while though, and Wizards and Warriors inevitably reveals its strengths. If you're looking to save a princess in this trilogy, the original Wizards and Warriors is the only place you will find her. Wizards and Warriors is a steep challenge that fans of ActRaiser and Ghosts and Goblins should enjoy. Wizards and Warriors drops in at number 81 on our list. Share your memories in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching. One day in 5th grade, my friend Zeb came over after school where I proudly showed him my new Nintendo game, Adventure Island. I had already conquered the first few levels at home, and I couldn't wait to show him this brand new Super Mario-style side-scroller. To my utter surprise, the moment we started playing, his eyes lit up in recognition. This game wasn't new, he told me. He had played it many times before, and its name was Wonder Boy. Not true, I exclaimed. Its name was Hudson Adventure Island. I showed him the cartridge to prove my point. He kept insisting that the game was really Wonder Boy and that he had played it on Sega. He happened to be the only person I know who owned a Sega Master System rather than an NES, so I couldn't really further argue my point. With the advent of the internet, I learned that he and I were both correct. Adventure Island on the NES is a direct port of Wonder Boy on Sega, just with a new title and minor gameplay differences. Zeb and I connected years later, and one of the first conversations we had was our argument over Wonder Boy and Adventure Island. Ah, memories. Journey to Silius was yet another side-scrolling run-and-gun platformer on a system that had plenty. So why did I pick this up? The cover art. I know, buying a game based on the box is a rookie mistake, and I certainly knew better at this point, but just look at that. An actual game screen superimposed over the art. It looks cool as hell. The graphics have a crisp and realistic look, which is difficult to pull off with the NES color palette. I snagged it and brought it home, and was promptly in for a surprise. It wasn't the graphics that surprised me, or the gameplay. Rather, it was the music. It isn't the only NES game to have good music. Even the simple Super Mario Bros. Theme is so iconic and so much a part of the game, it's hard to play without the sound on. The music in Journey to Silius downright rocks. Seriously, I blasted the soundtrack in my car on the way home from work. The hard-driving beat keeps you playing what is a fun but sometimes brutally challenging game. I have to recommend Journey to Silius. Just turn that volume up. Share your memories in the comments. Thanks for watching. I missed the boat on Legend of Zelda. By the time I upgraded to an NES, Zelda 2 was the hot new game, but as the years wore on, I became a big fan of Zelda clones. And while it's safe to say Crystallis was the best of these, Willow is my favorite. When Willow hit the market, I could play anything that said Capcom on the box, and the company didn't let me down with this game. I wasn't sure what to expect at first, but I immediately fell in love with the unique graphical style and catchy soundtrack. Willow scratched that action RPG itch that I suffered from. Sure, it's an extremely loose retelling of the story from the film. In fact, it differs so much that I long assumed it was a completely different game in Japan that had simply been redressed with the Willow license when it came to North America. But it didn't bother me too much. The odd appearance by characters like Mad Mardigan and Finn Raziel was enough to satisfy. It was a well-made game with very few signs of being rushed, and I felt a good deal of satisfaction when I beat the final boss into oblivion. Share your memories in the comments, and thanks for watching.
Developed and published by Nintendo, Joy Mech Fight was released in Japan for the Famicom in 1993, almost 3 full years following the Super Famicom's release. The development history behind this game is quite interesting. It was created by 2 students who were attending a game development seminar hosted by Nintendo. They initially named it Battle League. Nintendo, seeing the final product, was so impressed by their programming skills that they opted to publish the game for the Famicom under the name Joy Mech Fight. The game is a one-on-one fighter that plays very similar to Street Fighter II and Killer Instinct, both released for the Super Famicom. All the characters are robots, each with floating limbs. According to the developers, the robots in the game were designed with floating limbs in order to get around hardware limitations so they could make the animation as smooth as possible. Needless to say, they succeeded, and it's also what gives Joy Mech Fight its charm. Thanks for watching.
The NES at our house was something I had to share with my older brother. When we rented a game, we had to decide on something that we would both enjoy, and in rare circumstances, we got to add a new game to our collection. We had to share those as well. One game I got to call my very own was Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. I adored the cartoon the game was based on, and I remember asking for and getting a Chip 'n Dale stuffed 2-toy pack that I saw at Zeller's for Christmas. Just like my cherished stuffed toys, I love Rescue Rangers on the NES, not just because it was my game or that it played the show's theme when you booted up the cart, but because it offered just the right amount of challenge. I spent a lot of time with our NES, but I can't say I was particularly good at many games, nor finished them without the help of Game Genie. Rescue Rangers was a game that I actually finished, and it was just as hard as it needed to be for the audience it was intended for. While the game was mine, it was still fun to play with my brother in 2-player co-op mode where you stun one another with projectiles and then picked up the other player to throw them at enemies or into bottomless pits.